This is the third and final presentation in our annual policy and advocacy training series called Take the Next Step, Getting Your Message Out and Learning from Public Officials. This training series is co-sponsored by Hawaii Children's Action Network, Hawaii Public Health Institute, Hawaii Appleseed, Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations, Common Cause Hawaii, Blue Zones Project, and Focused. I just wanted to give everyone sort of a sense of what's going to happen today. There are actually two parts to today's session. The first 45 minutes to an hour is going to be on communications and getting your message out. And then at around 10 o'clock, we'll transition to the legislative panel with Representative Stacelynn Eli, Kauaʻi Councilmember Luke Evslin, and Representative Amy Perruso. And that's going to be moderated by Lisa Maruyama, the president and CEO of HANO. So we have got a great couple hours here in store for you today. We'll take a quick break in between the two parts, but be sure to stick around to the end, and we'll try and take as many questions as possible throughout the next 2 hours. So I just wanted to dive right in and introduce myself. My name is Ryan Catalani. I was born and raised in Hawaii in Kaneohe. I was a film major in college, and what I've done so far, I co-founded a nonprofit called Mobility Mobilidad, and we did art and storytelling projects with immigrants and displaced communities. I worked at a nonprofit called Family Promise that worked with children and families experiencing homelessness. This was back in Delaware, although there is one here as well. And then I now work at Hawaii Children's Action Network, which is dedicated, as many of you know, to public policy and advocacy, where I oversee our fundraising and communications. I just want to say that although I am doing this presentation, as you can see, I feel like I'm always learning too. I am certainly not perfect either. And there are a million ways to do all the things that we're about to talk about. These are some things that I've picked up along the way, things that I've learned, and things that honestly I try to keep in mind myself as I do my own work. If you haven't yet, I would love to ask you to put in the chat your name, what you do, where you're joining us from, just so we can all start to get to know each other. Also, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many as possible along the way. Okay, so this part of the session is about communications, and I wish I could give you something like 13 weird tricks to be successful. Unfortunately, I cannot, because this is not a one-size-fits-all sort of field. But the best I can give you today is 4 things maybe to think about as you're working on your communications and your public communications in particular. I am guilty myself of not thinking about all these things all the time. We're only human. We have limited time and resources, and there are no hard and fast rules. These are just sort of 4, basic things to keep in mind to improve your chances of success. Some things might be obvious to you, some things maybe you've never heard of, and I'd love to know your feedback as we get started. So the first one, I think it's really important to start your communications with thinking about what is really your goal. It's fun to think about the tactics, like, should I be on TikTok? Should I do this sort of thing? Should I make this graphic? But thinking about strategy first with communications, as with a lot of things, absolutely pays dividends in the end. So make sure you're not putting the cart before the horse, in other words. There's a common notion, for example, that, okay, let's grow our social media followers. Maybe that's our goal. But to what end? Can you go a little bit deeper and think about, why are you trying to do that? Is it to increase the number of people who work at your nonprofit, if you work in a nonprofit, so you can ask them to testify? Is it to ensure a certain group knows about the resources or the services that's being offered? Is it to increase your number of donors? Or maybe it's to get people to change their mind about a certain issue. The more clear and specific you can get about what you're trying to accomplish from the get-go, I think the better chances of success in the end. You know, audience usually isn't the end goal. It's not just about the number of people seeing your post, it's about influence. And you know, so different organizations use different communication strategies in different ways because they have different audiences. It's all about like, where do they find that maximum influence? Some may not need to use social media at all. Some might. So when people see that you have something to offer, that's when they can start coming to you organically. I would also suggest, you know, this is January. This is a good time to reflect on past years. You know, what's worked well for you in communications. Take a look back at, you know, what you've done over the past 12 months and see what has resonated with people, what hasn't. And how can you know this? There are actually a lot of great tools out there, especially if you use digital communications already. If you don't, you might look at media mentions, you know, has your story been in the paper, what things got picked up by reporters, what things didn't. But I will also say there are a lot of great free analytics tools you can look at. And I'll be trying to share a bunch of these tools throughout the presentation. But these are things like Google Analytics, which you can set up on your website to see what pages people are going to and even where they're coming from. On Facebook, Facebook and Instagram, you can really see over any time period, really, what posts have done well in terms of what have gotten the most likes, the most comments, the most engagement. You can even see on Facebook who's in your audience. You know, what are the demographics, gender, age, location, things like that. Same thing on Twitter and most of the other major social media platforms. You can look. And this is a great time to do it right now in January as we get started for the year. Look back and see what has resonated with people. I would also think about, you know, these questions like any project. You know, what is your timeline? You're busy and you need to prioritize. What's the budget? You can get some great stuff for free online, but as with anything, there is a limit to what you can get for free. Like on social media. Ads, when you pay for social media ads, they simply reach more people than if you were to just post something. You know, that's in their business interest. So there are different depending on your strategy, your objective, different ways to balance this. You know, you could spend, let's say, 100 hours of your time building your follower base, or you could spend $100 to get it into the same number of people. So one is not necessarily right or wrong, in my opinion. It depends on what your goal really is. And of course, considering your team, if you're a team of one, maybe you can't do the same as others with the same number, with a larger staff. So maybe that's an opportunity to think about what resources you can leverage, volunteers, partner organizations. A lot of online platforms have discounts for 501c3 nonprofits. So I would just encourage you to think about all these things at the front end, especially if you're doing some sort of, you know, major communications push, or you hope to. The last thing I would introduce, and this is something I have to constantly think about myself too, are SMART goals. You know, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And this helps you really narrow down and make sure your goals are something that you can actually accomplish and know if you've accomplished. I've also seen an I and E added to SMART, so SMART-E, you know, to make sure they're inclusive and equitable. And I think that's an important reminder too. How will you know you're successful? You know, whether you eventually are going to be sending a tweet or a press release or an op-ed, you start with your objective, and you have to know how you have achieved that goal. There has to be a way. There are some ways to make it measurable again. Besides those analytics platforms that I mentioned, you know, and maybe it's not even online social media, maybe you're looking at email signups, maybe you're looking at pieces of testimony. But what I will say, besides those other analytics, there's a cool tool that you can download on Google Chrome called CrowdTangle that lets you see how many people are interacting on social media with any given page, your own or any page on the internet. You can see what they're saying about it. You can see it on different social media platforms. So this might be a, you know, if you're trying to, as part of your SMART or SMART-E goal, think about online reach. This might be a good way to help with that. As you're introducing yourself, if you are working on any communications plans for this year, or you hope to be, why don't you share it in the chat? Let us know what you're working on. What's a good time frame? I mean, personally, you can go a whole year, you can go multi-year, but for people like me, I think 90 days is a good amount of time. It's not too far in the future, but it is like a whole calendar quarter. So you can see, it gives you enough time to execute a strategy, but it's not so much time that you sort of lose track of it. It lets you look at holidays. You can think about what vacations you or your team are taking. So I'd say, if you're not sure where to start with the communications plan, think about the next 90 days or 3 months. In terms of executing your plan, there's some great tools you can get for free for that too. At HCAN, we use a platform called Asana, but there are a lot of project management tools. We like this one because it lets you see your tasks in different ways. You can see it on a calendar or a list or a board with different categories. And the other cool thing is that it integrates with another tool that we use, which is called Slack. Many of you are probably familiar with it now. It's sort of a team messaging app. And one nice thing is that Asana and Slack work very nicely together. So if someone shares something that we want to put, let's say on our social media at some point, we can take it directly from Slack and create a task. There's a button there and it goes directly into our social media calendar. So it just sort of like makes it a little bit easier to stay organized. If you're anything like us, there's a ton of stuff coming in, all the time. And if it's not on the to-do list, it may as well not exist. So, we like to keep it streamlined. If you use other tools to plan projects or coordinate with your team, go ahead and drop that in the chat too, if you have any tips on this. Okay, moving into the big picture of communications. And there are a couple of things, once you've established your strategy, once you know exactly what you want to do, that I would encourage you to think about before you get too far into the weeds. The first, number one, is your audience. Once you've determined your goal and your level of resources, you can really think about your audience. And I would, as much as you can, think about like who you want to receive this, the message or the stories you'll be sending out and why, and then start to develop a mental picture of them. It doesn't have to be, one sort of like a one-to-many thing. Like maybe you're not just talking to a whole big group of people, maybe you're talking to an intermediary, maybe, for example, you're an English-speaking organization and you want to reach older people who speak another language, but you can't afford translations, you can't afford TV or newspaper ads where that audience might be. So maybe you target their English-speaking kids instead. So think about the audience, and it has a lot to do with your goals and the budget and everything you've established before you've gotten to this point. Some other examples, maybe one of your goals is to mobilize supporters, but you don't have very much capacity. So instead, you're just targeting partner organizations, people you already work with, people who are more receptive to your communications already. But if you have more capacity, maybe you have a bigger budget, a bigger team, more time, maybe that's when you try to do sort of a mass messaging campaign to get to the people most affected by the issue. Again, these are just sort of brainstorming ideas. Don't take this too literally. If you're trying to persuade the opposition and you don't have a lot of time or money, maybe just go right to the decision makers. Talk directly to the people who are going to make that decision. If you have more capacity, more time, more money, more resources, more people, maybe that's when you try to design a message that can reach those everyday people who don't know much about the issue, who are already opposed and try to change their minds. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is, as you're developing this, just be as specific as you can. Rarely are you trying to reach everyone with every single communication or every single campaign. And that's okay. Maybe you have multiple distinct audiences, but they might require multiple distinct messages to reach them in the end. So just keep that in mind too. I think keeping up a steady drumbeat is important as well. You know, whatever your goal is, it's not going to be accomplished all at once with a single. I mean, you know, as a film major, I did design. I would love to think that a single graphic I make is going to change people's hearts and minds, but probably not. You know, they might not even see it. You know, think about all the emails you get. I don't open every single one, maybe every third one, you know, from an organization I like. And so only a fraction of your audience, whatever you determine that to be, will see any message at any given time. You know, so you can be a broken record, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, it's good. Being a broken record is staying on message, essentially. So just keep in mind with your goal that, you know, it doesn't all boil down to this one tweet, this one post. You know, it's that constant flow. The other thing I like to think about is making sure every slice of cake has the same layers. And what I mean by this is that wherever someone sees your message, whether it's on an email, whether, you know, it's on social media or a press release, you know, keeping a consistent brand, making sure that it has all the same components that you want it to, wherever they take that slice of cake. You know, when you have a cake with a lot of beautiful layers, it doesn't matter if you start at the top or on the side, you're still going to get all that chocolate and looks like raspberry and blueberry. This cake is well designed, you know, and so I think I would encourage your communications to be too. And what I mean by that more specifically, your mission and vision, you know, make sure you're always coming back to that. People might not know if it's the first time they're seeing what your organization is all about. And, you know, it doesn't have to be so literal, but just a reminder, you know, if in HCAN's social media, we can remind people or suggest that we have something to do with children, you know, we want to ensure all children are healthy and safe. Again, we don't have to say our mission is ... you know, just always coming back to that same sort of tone. You can also think about consistency visually. I certainly do, but you know, things like colors and fonts, you know, maybe not the most paramount importance for everything, but it is nice when people are able to see something and they know it's part of a whole. So again, keeping that slice of cake consistent. Moving on to messages and what messages will you send? And by messages here, I mean, what's the main idea? And this is why it's important to keep your audience in mind from the get-go, because you might have different messages for different audiences, and they can still be part of the same big picture strategy. When you're thinking about the message or your main idea, one thing I like to think about are the consequences of the metaphors that we use. There was a study back in 2011 that did a test where they showed people two different messages. Crime is a beast ravaging the city, and crime is a virus ravaging the city. And what they found is that showing those things had a bigger split in people's perceptions than almost any other factor, including between Democrats and Republicans. And so when they showed people the statement that crime is a beast ravaging the city and sort of talked about it in that framing, ultimately people thought that much more so that this meant that we have to do a better job of enforcing the law, that, you know, we have to crack down on crime, whatever that means. And, you know, if there are underlying social issues, you know, they didn't really see that as the solution. When they saw the message that crime is a virus ravaging the city, it was, as you might guess, the opposite effect. And again, this was a bigger split than any other factor that they found. So, you know, metaphors have been studied. There's this scholar named George Lakoff who studies what he calls conceptual metaphors or framing. There's a big body of research into this if you want to go that deep. But just think about, you know, how the very simple words you're saying might have that effect on the audience. A couple more examples from something called moral foundations theory. This is a psychology professor named Jonathan Haidt. And he argues that liberals and conservatives respond very differently to 5 or 6 moral dimensions. Liberals feel more strongly about the one he calls caring, and conservatives feel very strongly about the dimensions he calls loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And you can actually take this test online yourself at yourmorals.org. I think it's very interesting. There's one called fairness, though, that depending on how you frame fairness can get very different responses from different groups. So he says the most general form of fairness is proportionality, which means that everyone gets benefits in proportion to their contributions. No one is cheating or getting cheated. And he writes, if you've ever shared a kitchen with roommates, you know how sensitive people can be about who's doing their fair share and who's the slacker in the kitchen, but doesn't do a proportional amount of cleaning and shopping. So everyone kind of left, right, and center values proportionality, but conservatives do value it more. And this is research that's been replicated across the world, actually. There's a fairness that he calls procedural fairness, which means that honest, open, and impartial rules are used to determine who gets what. And this is in the statement, society should make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed. And again, that has actually the opposite pattern in terms of where liberals and conservatives respond. But it's not like anyone is really disagreeing. Lastly, there's the concept of fairness as equality. In other words, everyone gets the same. As encompassed in the statement, ideally everyone would end up with roughly the same amount of money. So as you can see, this one has the sharpest decline on the conservative spectrum. And, pretty strong agreement still on the liberal spectrum. So even within, these basic things, fairness, everyone knows what fairness means, right? Not necessarily. Depending on how you frame even these basic concepts, it can get very different responses from the audience that you're intending. He also uses these examples of tax fairness. On the left, tax fairness might mean tax the wealthy, that's what's fair. And on the right, tax fairness might mean, you worked for, this certain amount of money. So, spread your work ethic, not your wealth. Chip and Dan Heath wrote this book called Switch, where they talk about the elephant and the rider metaphor. This is a similar concept to what Nobel Prize winning economist Daniel Kahneman has wrote about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. The basic concept is that as humans, even the best of us, we always start with an emotional response, our unconscious intuitions about things, that's the elephant. And then only after that do we sort of, does our conscious strategic reasoning, our higher level reasoning kick in, and then we sort of, we can even sort of justify why the elephant is going in that direction. What this metaphor is trying to say is that, our elephants are much more powerful than the little riders on them. And so that's where we start as humans. There's an interesting experiment on this where subjects were asked whether they would opt for surgery if the survival rate is 90%, while others were told that the mortality rate is 10%. Obviously, these are the same things, but the first framing increased acceptance, even though the situation was actually no different in the end. That's just where our emotional, they were primed to think about their mortality. They were primed to think about their survival, and they went two totally different directions. In Switch, they write that our minds are well adapted to providing post hoc, after the fact justifications or explanations for the moral convictions or intuitions that we already possess. And they say this seems counterintuitive because we have grand visions of ourselves as rational actors, who make measured arguments and have thought carefully about our political affiliations, our moral convictions, and our religious beliefs. But at our core, we are still all, these emotional animals. So how can we take this into practical tips for communications? In a different book by the same authors, Chip and Dan Heath, called Made to Stick, they have this acronym called SUCCESS. which has these 6 factors for compelling messages. So simplicity is about finding the essential core of ideas. They quote this saying from defense lawyers that if you argue 10 points, even if each is a good point, when they get back to the jury room, they won't remember any. So simplicity. Unexpectedness, and they don't just mean surprise, they mean generating interest and curiosity if you want your idea to endure. And so they think about how can we open a gap in people's knowledge and then fill them, teach them something new, unexpected. In concreteness, they talk a little bit about nonprofits on this point, that mission statements, visions, and strategies are often can be too ambiguous. But they give this interesting example from the Nature Conservancy that instead of talking in terms of land area, they talked about landscapes. So instead of 40 million acres, they talked about the goal of preserving 50 landscapes. They gave them names, or they talked about the names they had. They sort of personalized the land. They write that memory is not a filing cabinet. It's more like Velcro, and the more hooks an idea has, the better it clings to your memory. In terms of credibility, this doesn't necessarily just mean having a very credible or authoritative person, because we can't always have that. They're talking about making sure that sticky ideas carry their own credentials. They give this example from Reagan when he asked, before you vote, ask yourself if you are better off today than you were 4 years ago. So this goes right to your own. It doesn't need, the Surgeon General saying, this is a good idea. You can think about it. You can judge its credibility just within yourself. Emotions and stories we'll talk about a little bit more. But in terms of emotions and making the audience care, ultimately people are busy, people have a lot going on, people are seeing and consuming a lot, especially these days. And so maybe you think, and certainly I do, how can we appeal to people's self-interest? Not just why is this good in the greater good sort of context, but what's in it for me personally? Or maybe you appeal to their self-identity. What would someone like me do in this situation? Why should someone like me care? And in terms of stories, and by stories, these are sort of the personal anecdotes, the human stories. They call it a flight simulator for the brain when you're able to capture a good story, which it's putting this knowledge into a framework that is more lifelike and more vivid than just factual and logical arguments. So this brings us to your content, and how can you make your content effective? So there are, you've thought about your audience, you've thought about your messages. Where are you going to put this now? Like, how are you going to actually get this out? It goes back to your budget. It goes back to, maybe you have multiple audiences and they're in different places. As you're thinking about your audience, maybe you think about their lifestyle. I certainly do. I try to create a mental image of, my intended audience and where even I think they'll be receiving the message. Are they going to be scrolling at bed at night? Are they reading this in an email in the morning? Those two things might produce very different results in terms of, what the end product looks like. So there are a lot of different places that you can put out a message. Unfortunately, I tend to think there's not a one-to-one relationship between places that are really cheap and easy to do effectively and have a bigger audience. So things like, a blog or your own organic social media. By that, I mean just posting on your own Facebook page. Those are cheaper and easier to do effectively. You have total control over them, but there's no audience that's guaranteed. You have to build that yourself. And looking at all the way at the other end, a news story, direct mail, something that you mail, or a TV ad or a social media ad. Again, you can get huge audiences with those, important audiences that are built in, but they might not be the cheapest to get or the easiest to do the most effectively. So there are trade-offs with things. It goes back to your goals, your budget and how much resources you're trying to put in. And sort of, what type of audience you're reading. Maybe if you're trying to reach a more elite quote unquote audience, maybe that's where you think about, an op-ed is worth those trade-offs. If you're trying to reach a more, normal people audience, maybe that's when you pitch a TV station, instead. And, there is, you may notice, nothing in that lower left quadrant of something that is harder to do and a smaller audience. That's where I would put things like one-on-one meetings and organizing. And if you've been in our previous trainings, you may know about this as well. I know Christy is here. You can talk to her more about organizing and building power in that way. If you're not where your audience is yet, how can you get there? Let's say you've determined that your audience is on, let's say, would be most receptive to social media, but you just don't have them. Can you leverage one existing thing that you already have to build another? So in your email newsletters, are you asking people to follow you on social media or vice versa? And then thinking about collaboration, can you partner with other organizations to cross promote? This training series is a great example of that. We had multiple, more than a half dozen local nonprofits all agree to share the same message, if you will, the same message and content on each of their own platforms. And we reached a much wider, more diverse, bigger audience than probably any individual organization would have otherwise. And there's no real cost to that aside from, asking. You can also think about having on social media, ambassadors, social media ambassadors who are going to like and share your posts, people who are going to keep an eye out for those things, or you send them, things that you'd like them to help promote. Thinking about more about audience, Pew Research has done some studies on where people in Hawaii prefer to get their local news. And so the top ones, this is a study from 2019, the top was TV, but right there with it was social media and news websites. Right below that, about half as many preferred, as in their number one preference was to get their local news from print. And then about half of those preferred to get their local news from radio. So again, thinking about your audience, we can zoom out a little bit at where people get their local news in general. So, although people don't necessarily get their local news all the time from, say, local government, they do a good amount of the time, 2/3, it just might not be their preference. Other things like daily newspapers, the print, right? It might not be people's top number one local news source, but they look at it from time to time at least. So again, thinking about your audience and where you want them to be can really play a big role. Even within social media, there are vast discrepancies, as I'm sure you've experienced in your own use of social media. This is a study from last year, 2021, that looked at the percent of Americans that are on and use any social media platform, YouTube, and has been by far the number one social media platform that people are on. And then you have emerging ones like TikTok, Nextdoor, that are starting to gain some use. But I think the really interesting thing is when they break it out by demographics, because again, this goes back to knowing your audience. This is between educational levels, people who have completed high school at most, and those who have a bachelor's degree or more. And you can see, for example, LinkedIn, there's a huge difference, in between the adoption for people who have just completed high school and those who maybe have master's degrees are much more likely to be there. So you know your audience best, or maybe you'll start thinking about it. What can this tell you? Same things with age. The 65 plus crowd is really not on Snapchat, but the 18 to 29-year-old crowd is. Snapchat, in fact, much more than almost any other platform. TikTok is really coming up there, and I would probably suggest is only going to increase the next time they do this. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on TikTok, though. If your audience is not there, don't worry about it. Just enjoy your TikToks on your own time. Same thing by income. An interesting thing here is that if we look at Nextdoor, people with lower household incomes, almost no adoption of Nextdoor. It's really just the people at the higher end, and this is the highest tier that they had, $75,000 and more. There's a big gap there. So, if it depends on, again, who you're trying to target, they could be in vastly different places on the internet. So you have come up with your main idea. What does it look like? How do you get that across? And yeah, I have a picture of a brain. In one of my previous organizations, we call this the big, beautiful brain, because you have great ideas in here, but sometimes it's hard to get them out to other people in a way that they care about. Chip and Dan Heath called this the curse of knowledge. Once they say, once we know something, we find it hard to imagine what it was like to not know it. Once you have something, once you know something so well, it can be hard to put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't. There's this cool experiment on where one person, they assigned people in pairs, and then one person in the pair tapped out a rhythm, like on the table. They tapped out the rhythm of a well-known song, and then the other person tried to guess. Just listen to the taps and tried to guess. The people who are tapping out the song thought that the listener should be, at least 50-50, should get it right at least half the time. In practice, it was actually 1 out of every 40 times. And the tappers were shocked. They thought it was obvious. The song is in their brain. They're tapping out this obvious rhythm. But, if you're on the other side and you're just listening to random taps, it sounds like Morse code, like you have no idea what they're trying to do. So this is just a reminder that, especially for, if you're an expert in a field, to really put yourself back in that beginner's mind and think about, what someone who is not that expert, how they would think about it. There are different ways to do it. There's something called like the 3 whys or 5 whys, asking yourself, why does this matter at different stages? You can think about how you would describe it to a parent or your grandparent or something, or someone who feels that. You can sort of imagine how someone is going to respond to something. In any case, as much as possible, I try to assume limited knowledge and limited time and interest in understanding what I'm trying to say. As an example of putting my audience first, here's a sentence that would be very easy to write for me. Something like, HCAN is proud to announce the launch of its 5th annual cohort of PLTI, which is now open to participants statewide. As someone who works at HCAN and knows what PLTI is and cares about what a cohort is, this makes total sense to me. Some of you may know what PLTI is and maybe makes sense to you, but someone in receiving this in a press release or a social media post, it's like, what are these abbreviations and why should I care? So if we really think about it, I might say something like this: a free training program is now accepting online applications from residents who want the tools and knowledge to make positive changes in their communities. Now, I didn't mention anything about HCAN yet. I didn't mention anything about what the program is called, but I'm really trying to think about, why people should care about what I'm trying to say. Yeah, and thanks, Raquel. It is an amazing cohort community, and we have, you can submit an application if you're interested year-round. So one other practical tip, I like to think about this concept called the inverted pyramid. This comes from journalism, but I don't just use it for press releases. I use it for kind of everything I write to the public, social media, email, whatever. And the concept of this is to start actually the opposite way that we're often taught in school. In school, you write, your 5-paragraph essay that starts with the introduction, you develop the evidence, and then at the very end, maybe the last sentence, I don't know, Rep. Perruso, correct me, but that's when you say like what the conclusion is, why people, what you've determined about this. In the inverted pyramid model, you start from why people should care. What's the most important part of your argument? And then go down from there. Why this is important is because if someone stops after the first sentence, they can still get the most important piece of information. If someone stops reading after the first paragraph, still, they'll have every piece of information you want them to know. This is kind of human nature. We unfortunately, I don't know about you all, I don't necessarily read everything to the very end. And so if you save the most valuable parts for the end, your audience might not even get it. This works just as well for a tweet as it does an Instagram caption or a press release. And with press releases, I'll just mention that the audience is not who you're trying to ultimately reach with what's in the press release. Your audience is actually reporters who are very busy and in general can't afford to spend a lot of time trying to understand everything. And so making it as concrete and distilling it down into its core at the very beginning is really key to getting anyone's attention, I think. Then you have your personal stories. If you were in our previous training session, you know how valuable personal stories can be. People connect on a human level. And so think about how you can, whether they're people, in a program that you work with, maybe they're constituents, maybe they're people in your community. How can you find people who can bring to light the messages that you established earlier? And there might be multiple stories per message. That's great. But, people respond just on that human level to human stories. And it helps your idea, your message, your communication strategy just be that much stickier. Now I want to add in a couple more practical tools. If you don't know about Bitly, it's a great tool that can help with your communications, because instead of, if you have like a Google Docs URL, it's indecipherable, it's a lot of letters and characters. You can turn it into a short, memorable, and perhaps most importantly, trackable URL, so that if you share this, you can sign up for free online. You put your long URL, it creates something memorable, something relevant to your brand or communications. And then you can go back on the Bitly website and see how many people have clicked on it. It's very cool. Now I know QR codes have really come in vogue throughout the pandemic. But I would say, still use them sparingly. It's really only practical for printed things. So, don't feel the need to put a QR code on something if it's just, going to be on Instagram. That will not help someone access that content unless they have two phones. They can put one at the other. Just use Bitly to make a short URL. But I will say, if you determine that you need a QR code, you're printing something out and you want people to get to a website, You can actually create a QR code right from Chrome if you have a kind of updated version of Chrome. On that sharing icon, you can create one right from there for free. So, you know, it is getting a lot easier every day to make one if you need it. Like I said before, don't feel like you need to be on every platform. You know, the platforms that the quote unquote youth are on, you know, if you're trying to reach those, it's not necessarily, it's not like a one and done. You know, you have platforms like TikTok require a lot of effort and authenticity and the same level of energy you would put into understanding any other platform. So, you know, I absolve you if you don't want to be on TikTok, be creating stuff on there. Like, don't necessarily feel pressured to, especially if it's not where you think your audience is right now. In terms of creating graphics and videos, some of you may know that Canva has a pro version that is free for 501c3 nonprofits. Could be a good resource for you. For videos, iMovie, which you can download for free on a Mac or an iPhone or an iPad, is actually an excellent tool for editing short clips of videos and audio and titles and things together, and pretty easy to use. For social media, we like to use these platforms to help us manage and schedule in advance. At HCAN, we currently use one called Hootsuite. There's one called Buffer that I really like too, we've used before. Basically, these let you sort of write things in advance and then schedule them out at a convenient time. So as impressive you may have been that HCAN is sending out stuff on social media 24/7, no, unfortunately we're not. It is our little robots who do that all for us once we've developed the content. We're doing more and more audio now, you know, podcasts, radio interviews, things like that. And there's a cool and actually free on a limited basis tool called Headliner that lets you take your audio and then it can transcribe it. It can make like a cool animated waveform and make it into a short video clip that you can share on social media. So, you know, if you're doing something on HPR, the conversation or something, you can take a snippet and make it into a video for social media for free. If you're doing emails, two tools that I like, there's a free website called Subjectline.com that you can put your email subject line in it, and it tells you, it gives you a score. It's not perfect, but it tells you what factors make that subject line work better or worse, depending on what you have in it. I certainly use it to test out different subject lines because I don't necessarily know what is best all the time. And then there's this free newsletter targeted toward nonprofits, but not necessarily just for nonprofits, that gives you monthly writing prompts, things like, you know, January is National Mentoring Month. You know, if you want to use something like that in your communications, or like upcoming pop culture events or movies or shows, just things that if that's just part of your strategy, you can integrate. I would also encourage you to just learn about platform best practices, you know, whatever, especially if it's one you're not as familiar with, you know, take a little bit of time and look at examples of what works well, you know, just even typing in, you know, Instagram best practices, LinkedIn best practices. There's a ton of stuff online for free for that. You know, with Instagram, for example, or I should say with all platforms, things are changing all the time. You know, on Instagram, if you put something in your story, you know, you can now put a link, you know, clickable link on there that people can access. So instead of being like, oh, go to the link in my bio, if you've done that, you know, you can now put a link directly in your Instagram story. So just sort of keeping up with these platform best practices wherever you are can be really helpful. And just as a closing note, keep experimenting. You know, if it's not working, try again. Go back to your goals. You know, walk through this process. I do all the time. I think about why isn't this working, or why did something resonate so much? And we just have to keep trying things and sharing our learnings with each other if you're interested. And I think this would be a great group to do that with. So now I'll pause for some questions if there are any.
Hi, Ryan. Oh, I'm sorry. This is being recorded. Yeah, I can go back and
It is, yep.
watch it. Awesome. Thank you
Yep.
so much. Enjoying the training. Mahalo so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
I do have a question. Sometimes we post something and we have Facebook, Instagram, whatever else, and we put the same thing in this in all media, and can be repetitive. But is it better to make different content for different, like how do you do what's the best practice? Just to get the message and repackage so it looks different? I mean, you did mention something in the talk, but I just wanted to dig a little deeper.
Right. What I will, I mean, of course, it goes back to like how much time and resources you have. If you need to get something out urgently and, you know, you got to get it out this afternoon and you just have this one graphic, you know, it's better than nothing. If you do have a bit more time, you know, even among different social media platforms, there are better and worse ways to format it for those platforms. For example, you know, if you are sharing multiple, you know, if you have like 2 graphics, right? Or if you have stuff that doesn't fit all in one, that can look very different on different platforms. On LinkedIn, you know, when you share multiple images, they get cropped and they're next to each other. So if you have text on one, you can't, it looks weird. You know, if you are on Twitter, you know, it has a much shorter character limit. And so you have to think about, am I, you know, repackaging this in a different way? You know, do I need to include all this information if there's a lot, or does it need to be, you know, a Twitter thread with multiple tweets included there? So what I would say is, you know, ideally, yes, there would be at least a little bit of customization per platform. The other thing that is helpful with, you know, if you do each platform separately for some posts is being able to tag people. And, you know, different people have different tags on different platforms. So, you know, that little bit of customization can really help too. But you can go all the way in the other direction, you know, of course, and take it as far as you want. And it's possible that you've developed really different audiences on different platforms, you know. Certainly we have seen that, for example, at HCAN on LinkedIn, people are more interested in, you know, if we post a you know, a chart or something with data related. Doesn't necessarily do as well on Instagram, that sort of thing. But when we post resources, you know, or things that are, you know, people can share, that does do well on our LinkedIn. So it really can vary on your you know, where your audience is on different platforms. And, you know, if you haven't really considered that, you know, those free analytics tools that the platforms use can be really helpful in looking at those patterns.
Thank you.
Yeah,
no problem.
Oh, Ryan, sorry, I need to ask, HCAN. Could you please just, what is your mission statement, or what is the goal of HCAN?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. So HCAN stands for Hawaii Children's Action Network. Our mission is to build a unified voice for Hawaii's children. And what we mean by that is bringing together community members, legislators, you know, business leaders, community leaders, advocates, to all be on the same page, know what the issues are, and then work together collaboratively through advocacy or other public policy means, try and solve those big picture issues. And so our vision is to ensure all of Hawaii's children are healthy, safe, and ready to learn. And those are our main priorities: the health, safety, education, and especially early learning, childcare, pre-K.
And there's a good group of you. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. And we thought you could do a coffee refill or a quick bathroom break. Just kind of transitioning between Ryan's excellent presentation. Thank you again, Ryan. I learned a lot. Your research on just how people receive information was really helpful to me. Good reinforcement, certainly in the way we think about Hano's communications as well. So thank you so much for that. And so for some of you, you may have stuck with us for the entire series, learned a lot about citizen advocacy, nonprofit advocacy, coalition building. Christy's here and is a past presenter as well. And so this is the final series in the series around the commitment from all of our organizations really to support all of you to do really good work in your communities to represent your issues, your missions, et cetera. And so we're really pleased to be able to bring you this content. And thanks for those of you who have stuck it out with us along the way for the entire series. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Lisa Maruyama, and I'm the president and CEO of HANO, Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations. And well, I know that there are some of you who are not affiliated with nonprofits today, but I can see some names of people who are affiliated with nonprofits, so welcome. And yeah, it's our commitment from HANO to make sure, again, that there's just a robust representation of citizen and nonprofit advocacy in our community. So thanks again for joining us. And so this particular, as we transition to this piece of the series, it's really around hearing from our public officials as to what resonates with them around citizen advocacy. How do we message? How do we engage? How do we build relationships with them? So it's really about hearing their mana'o, giving us tips on how best to communicate with them and engage with them. So we're really, really pleased today to have three people willing to take time on their Saturday to share that mana'o. Just a little bit about, just before I move on to the panel. Oh, and we are going to do breakouts, right, Ryan?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So I will just quickly tell you a little bit about HANO, and then we're going to go into breakouts. And then when we come back, I'll introduce the panelists. And so for those of you who may not be familiar, HANO is a statewide nonprofit, charitable nonprofit organization. And our mission is to support, unite, and strengthen the nonprofits in Hawaii as a collective force, and really with the ultimate goal to improve the quality of life in Hawaii via nonprofit service delivery. And so we do things like technical assistance, professional development, trainings, convenings, products and services that support operations for the nonprofit. But we also do advocacy, sector level advocacy at the federal, state, and county levels around things that are mission agnostic. So your operational environment, taxes, tax exemptions, regulatory issues, governance, et cetera, fundraising, your fundraising ability. So anything, again, that has nothing to do with your mission, it's not issues-based, it's really about improving your operating environment to be able to do your best work in your communities. All right, I'm going to commence with the second half of this presentation. And we have three wonderful public officials here with us today, and I'm really excited to introduce them to you. So we're going to start with Representative Stacelynn Eli. She's presently serving her second term at the state capitol. She's born and raised on the west side of Oahu, Hawaii, a fifth-generation Hawaiian homesteader and proud graduate of Nanakuli High and Intermediate School, yay, public schools. And in recognition of I thought this was an interesting piece of information, in recognition of high scholastic achievement in the field of economics, Rep. Eli was recently initiated as a member of Omicron Delta Epsilon, the International Honor Society in Economics. So it's interesting that Omicron pops up in all of these different ways now to us. Prior to her election in 2018 to represent District 43, Rep. Eli served as a member of the Nanakuli Maili Neighborhood Board for several years. She was a member of the Nanaikapono Hawaiian Civic Club, the Waianae Lions Club, and the Nanakuli Center for the Performing Arts, serving as the president of the board of directors. So just really good to see our public officials doing some great community service, some good nonprofit work as well. While at the legislature, Rep. Eli serves as vice chair of the Committee on Pandemic and Disaster Preparedness, and she's a member of the Finance Committee and Government Reform Committee. She's in several caucuses, the member of the Kuna Caucus, Native Hawaiian Affairs Caucus, and Women's Legislative Caucus, and the Majority Policy Committee. So that's a little snippet of Rep. Eli's background. Councilmember Luke Evslin is in his second year of his term as Kauaʻi County Council Member. He currently chairs the Finance and Economic Development Committee and is vice chair for the Planning Committee. Much of his platform revolves around how to sustain a viable future that includes incentivizing affordable housing developments and one day meet the demand, and environmental policies and stabilizing tourism infrastructure. He's a co-owner at Kamanu Composites, an Oahu-based outrigger canoe manufacturing company. Councilmember Evslin is also a board member and treasurer of Malama Puleia, a paddling coach at Island School, a former member of General Plan Citizens Advisory Committee and Open Space Public Access and Natural Resources Preservation Fund Commissioner. Councilmember Evslin has a master's in public administration with a focus in public policy, with a thesis on open spaces from the USC's Saul Price School of Public Policy. It's just another, example of a public official just deeply involved in his community. So that's really heartening. And finally, Representative Amy Perruso is a member of the State House of Representatives representing District 46, Launani Valley and Wahiawa communities. And she's a longtime resident of those communities. She currently sits on the Agricultural, Energy, and Economic Development and Finance committees of the legislature. She's a teacher at heart, and her endeavor is to educate our children, and it's taken her around the world from California to Shanghai to Finland, and finally to the Hawaii DOE, where she taught social studies for almost 20 years. And that's awesome public service. Rep. Perruso previously served as Secretary Treasurer of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. She was also a member of Governor David Ige's Every Student Succeeds Act team, which crafted a blueprint for the future of Hawaii's public schools. Representative Perruso has been a Fulbright Scholar and finalist for the Gilder Lerman National History Teacher of the Year Award. And when she's not working for her community, Rep. Perruso enjoys preserving her aina, surfing, and spending time with her family. And these were just, thank you for hearing me out. I just love hearing about all of the different backgrounds and details that sometimes we miss when we're engaging with our public officials. And again, chicken skin that all three are just really, again, deeply involved in their communities and very caring. So without further ado, we're going to commence this panel. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to make this kind of talk story. So I will ask a series of questions, and if you feel compelled to answer, jump in. And if all three of you want to answer, great. And I know that Rep. Perruso has to leave us at a certain point, so feel free to do that when you need to, Rep. Perruso, but we're going to commence with just some talk story. So just a first question to you all. Why did you choose public office? Like, it sounds like each of you were doing really, really interesting things in your communities. You were ensconced, already making impact. What brought you to public office? And what issues matter most to you? Let's add that to the question. And don't forget you're on, yeah, go ahead.
I can start just because I had never had any intention of running for office. But I, as a leader of HSTA, we were encountering a great deal of resistance to our demands for increased funding for public schools. And in 2018, there was a national movement for teachers to run for office, and I was part of that movement. So, I mean, it was a very concrete moment without which I would never have run.
Very cool that there are such initiatives. There should be such an initiative for every industry, actually, right?
I guess I can go next. I actually never thought I would run for political office. Like, I never thought I would be here. Like, I've been asked before I even considered running, and I would be like, never, I would never run. But you know, as you shared, I was heavily involved in our communities. I still am, and I actually started off, I guess, getting involved more in policy and politics because I was more engaged in activism against certain developments that was going on in my district. So I started off like really just wanting, you know, not to fight like physically or anything like that, but really just fighting for my district, and just found myself, you know, just involved with policy, because that really affects what's going on the ground level in our communities. So that was how I started. So yeah.
Yep, that's just a really authentic, genuine way to get started, is you care so much about your communities, you want to make an impact. So thank you. Councilmember Evslin?
So I kind of had a long and wandering journey. I had this business on Oahu I still have it, 14 years now we're going on, but I 6 years in, I was in a bad accident. I got run over by a motorboat, which I ended up moving from Oahu, where the business is, back to Kauaʻi. And that accident changed my life in all kinds of ways. And one of the big impacts was just sort of, I don't know, in some sense, realizing how fragile I am and how close to death we all are in some sense, and wanting to build resilience in my own life. And in some sense that bled into really wanting to build a more sustainable life for myself. And I moved off the grid on Kauaʻi, and we built this whole off grid, you know, setup, water catchment, the whole deal for 7 years. And as I was doing it though, I realized like all these efforts that I was putting in, you know, and almost like pulling up the drawbridge in some sense, really wasn't helping anybody except for, you know, myself and my wife at that point. And I sort of slowly started taking more and more steps out, doing more community work. And I, you know, did a lot of nonprofit work. And then I was on General Plan Community Advisory Committee, which for me was a real transformative, you know, time. And that I realized that there's a lot of policy answers out there for a lot of the problems that we face. I started blogging a lot, and then I, you know, started to write a column at Civil Beat, which I was just diving more and more into policy. And then I ended up wanting to get a master's degree in public policy, just to learn more about policy. And it was sort of like, you know, each of these little steps sort of leading me into finally running for office as kind of the next logical step. If I, you know, if I really wanted to make a difference as far as housing goes and trying to implement our Kauaʻi general plan, then it seemed like running for local office was that logical step. So that's where I'm at over this 10-year process.
Thank you. I mean, it's such a pleasure to get to know each of you. We don't have that luxury sometimes in the busyness of advocacy work, you know, when we're merely just sort of calling upon you to lobby you for our issues or whatever. So I really appreciate hearing a little bit more about your backgrounds and your passions, and also just your journeys of how the journey to public office wasn't really sort of an academic one. It just sort of crept up on you, on all three of you. And so that's been an interesting observation. Thank you for sharing that. And also just, I think the three of you each kind of come with different interest areas, right? So it's just been nice to see that diversity amongst the three of you. Okay, next question. Gosh, this is, you know, a loaded one that we're all asking of ourselves, but what do you see are the important issues for the state or for your county or for your county in 2022? What's on your minds? What do you hope to accomplish this year?
I guess I can go. I mean, it's kind of, I think my answer is going to be kind of loaded just because there's so many things going on. You know, for myself, I have been working on so much policy and different things on like human trafficking, because it's really affected not just my district, but just, you know, women and children across the state. And so one thing I do want to mention is that currently I represent the largest population of Native Hawaiians in the world. And so a lot of, you know, a lot of people talk about statistics that affect Native Hawaiians, but it's really being lived in my district because that's us. You know, not to say that it's just Native Hawaiians, but more than the majority are Native Hawaiian. And I think COVID just, you know, it threw wrenches, you know, in there for so many things. And to be honest, I feel like I'm just coming up for air after 2 years of COVID. You know, my district, we had the least amount of vaccinations for the longest time, at least the coast we did, but we had the highest rate of COVID. And so to be honest, like going into this session, I'm really just working, like even now, just trying to reconnect with my district to see like, you know, like where we're at and what issues are really important to us, you know, like in still dealing with COVID, like, you know, people are worried about their jobs, you know, they're worried about healthcare, you know, like those things are coming back into play. They're worried about the safety of our community because we were working on so many things prior to the initial lockdown. You know, I feel like I blinked and 2022 is here. So as far as like, you know, like what we're gonna be working on, at least for myself, I'm still trying to work that out, you know, with my district because, you know, I have Hawaiian homelands in my, you know, that makes up a good majority of my community. We're right by the shoreline.
Mhm.
You know, traffic is still a very, you know, big issue. And we just have all kinds of things that are going on, you know, so I mean, not to say everything, but everything is gonna be, you know, like a concern this next session because like for myself, you know, like we had last session, but again, like we're so deep in COVID and trying to protect and thrive at the same time, you know.
Yep.
So that's kind of where we're at, but I don't want to take up too much of the time, but I'm sure
Yeah.
Amy Luke is working on some things too.
Mahalo. Yeah, COVID is definitely distracting.
I can go next. Yeah. So I have been working still a lot with young people. And I think their issues really inform or shape the direction I'm headed in for 2022. And I would say top of mind is the climate crisis. And related to that is Red Hill, because I think it poses an existential threat to all of us. And it really makes us very aware of the fragility of our situation. So I think that in my work on the environmental protection committee and on ag, I'm really focused on healthy soil initiatives to further carbon sequestration, because we need to mitigate, like stop the, or just address these emissions, right? And I'm also really focused on farm to school, because I think that that's one way to diversify our economy away from the military and tourism, is to kind of look at strengthening our institutional purchasing. It seems fairly straightforward, and reduce our dependence on imports. So those, I think, for me are my foci for this session. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. It always turns sideways at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a winding road, this legislative experience. Many of us on the advocacy side feel your pain. I know it might be a little too early. Do you actually see some legislation coming out around the Red Hill issue, our water quality issue?
Yeah, I think the legislature is, at least the House, is of one mind. You know, we have strong consensus. So
yeah, and I want to say, like, I think so too. I think for the area legislators, more so, you know, because it's affecting their community communities directly, right now. And I think it's definitely going to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, not to take away from Luke, I just want to add that, as legislators, at least I can speak for myself, it's so important for us to hear from our constituents. Like I can say, like, I can read all my emails today, walk in tomorrow, and I have like 200. And I can tell you the ones that are going to catch my attention first are the ones who say, I live in your district. I just want to add, like, that's really important because while I would love to talk to everyone and hear from everyone, my priority is my community, my district. I mean, my cell phone number is not secret. Like, everybody got them. You know what I mean? Like, but it's like that, right? I mean, as local people, like, at least for my district, it has to be one-on-one. So like my community, although they have my office information, like they have my cell phone too. They know where I live. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm totally okay with them stopping by, like, I mean, it's a Hawaiian community, right? And so, I mean, I just want to add that to you folks too. So like, for when you're doing your advocacy, like if and when you're approaching a legislator, I think it goes a long way, if you can find people to talk with them from their district, because that hits your heart. I mean, your heart, at least for me, more than anything. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, I think it's the true, we forget what the word representative means, right? You're representing your district, and sounds like you're all doing a great job. And I think it's so cute and so local kind that you talking story with someone in chat and telling each other where you each live in Nanakuli. So that's so cute, right?
If you're from Nanakuli, if we all have like street names, but if you've been here a long time, like, and you're driving up the valley, it's like 1st to 6th Road. And if you don't know what that is, that means you just moved in, or you're not
right.
Like, you know what I mean? So that's why I'm like, I live
totally. But those are the things that bring us back to the basics, right? Of those kinds of relationships. So mahalo for that. Okay, Councilmember Evslin, your thoughts?
Yeah, my big picture, I'm always working on housing. And I think that, along with climate change, are obviously the two biggest crises we face locally and around the country. And there's so much that the county can do. So we've done a ton of work on zoning codes and our housing ordinances, trying to put more funding towards affordable housing. For me, this next 2022, I'm really focusing on infrastructure, as for us, lack of sewer and the proliferation of cesspools are a huge barrier to housing for local families. So that's kind of where my short-term focus is on over this next year, is trying to figure out funding for sewer expansion and just more ways to get people off of their cesspools. As far as climate, and housing really relates to climate change in so many ways. As we are, our current development patterns, kind of statewide, but certainly especially on Kauaʻi, is we're kind of consuming our agricultural land and our low density residential land, and we force people into, if you're trying to find a house, you got to drive 40 minutes to and from work. And so we're forcing people into long commutes, and transportation is obviously our #1 source of carbon emissions. So they really go hand in hand. And how do we try and ensure that everybody can find an affordable home close to where they work? So that's big picture. As far as climate change goes, we're working on some EV charger legislation to try and incentivize, or in some sense mandate, EV chargers island-wide. And the big part of that is, as EVs are going to get cheaper than fossil fuel cars over the next couple of years, there's a lot of households that are locked out of having an EV charger, right? If you live in a rental or a multifamily condo complex, or even if you have an older house, a lot of times it's impossible to put an EV charger in your house. So we really need to rely on a robust public EV charger network. So trying to figure that out has been incredibly challenging, but hopefully we get some legislation on the floor soon. And then some smaller stuff. I know there's a lot of tobacco advocacy people here, and I don't know if Al Psyche's in here, but hopefully we'll be at least introducing something to prohibit smoking in county parks soon enough here. Kauaʻi is the only county that still allows it. And I've got I don't know, a bill having to do with not feeding cats in county parks. We have a big, we're kind of the native bird center for Hawaii. We have no mongoose. We have lots of native birds here, which are under dire threat from feral cats. So trying to deal with that is a hard issue. So anyway, big picture: infrastructure, housing, climate change, and then some other smaller initiatives on the way.
Yeah, it kind of, you drive home or you remind us that around some of our climate change issues, while the state can play a role in regulating some of that or facilitating mitigation, et cetera, that the counties actually really are going to play a prominent role in fashioning policy that's going to think about your particular, customized to your communities, your islands, around climate change mitigation. So thank you for reminding us that kind of the distinction of how the state and counties are going to each play a role in this. Can you update us on anything that's happened with the landslide? I know that just happened in the last day, right? Is there anything to share on that?
Yeah, I don't have anything to share.
Oh, okay.
And I was actually on vacation until yesterday afternoon. I just got back, so I've only seen the updates that I think providing essential services has been important. They've been trying to stabilize it before they can clear the road and provide utilities, but I don't have any updates.
Well, just speaking to your kind of the need for infrastructure development and things like that. So, okay, mahalo. All right, next question. And by the way, if any of you have questions of our panelists, please feel free to put that in the chat as well. We're happy to entertain them. Okay. I guess this is about COVID and, how do you see your constituents engaging with you, with your bodies, legislature, or, council, county councils? And how do you intend to engage? How would you like to engage? What's going to be the reality given, and we created this question before like the holidays, and seriously, Omicron has just thrown us all for a loop just within the last 2 weeks, right? Everybody's had to kind of change up the way we're engaging. And so what was a reality 2 weeks ago is probably different going into January, right? So can you share your latest thoughts about how you plan to engage with your constituency and given COVID?
I can start. Although I think Stacelynn and I have a lot of the same strategies. I think we both use social media a lot to connect with community. And I know that she also does like town hall forums, and which I do as well. Like once a month, I do a third Thursday meeting where we basically address a particular issue that's of interest to the community, but that's on social media, and it's just really hard. I think the other thing I'm going to try to do as we are in lockdown, so the Capitol will be closed, is just make myself available walking throughout the district when I have time, because when we're outdoors and we can have conversations at a distance, I think it's still important. It's an important way for people to be heard, because not everybody's on social media, and we all so miss those community meetings. I feel like people are starting to get very sad. So being in such isolation for such long periods of time. So I think those, and also just like trying to be as outward oriented as possible for this session, making an extra effort to communicate as much as possible.
Yeah, one of the things that as somebody on the outside of the process, I find frustrating is just as the lockdown happens, and I understand for public health reasons why this has to be for this legislative session. But I actually don't see a lot of replacement activities that are filling the void of engagement, right? For community to give feedback. And I understand it's all about public health, it's all about safety, but we're just taking away from the engagement process, not kind of coming up with creative solutions to enhance communication. That's just my 2 cents as moderator rights. And I'll shut up. Rep,
No,
Eli.
that's totally right. I think, I just, not just currently like what's going on, but I think for my district, it's been a long journey with COVID, because I also have to be careful of the messaging that we put out. There was just this tone of really scolding, I think a while ago. And, like for my particular district, like, especially with such a large Native Hawaiian population, and just to be blunt about it, like, Native Hawaiians, like, we have felt like, like we have not been heard. And like, you know what I mean? And the stereotypes around us and, like how we receive things, is sometimes not the nicest, even amongst, just in the political arena alone, you know what I mean? And so like, for me, like, I really have to find ways to engage my community. They're active on social media, but to get, community members to attend a Zoom meeting, like, a while ago, everyone was like, what is that? What is a Zoom meeting? You know what I mean? And so like, for me, I just would say like, this cell phone has been like my saving grace, because I mean, that's what I had to do. I had to text all my friends, all my family members, all the community advocates that I knew of, all the leaders. Like, I mean, it was constantly like, just, hey, like, because sometimes it's not enough for them to hear from me. They have to hear from others that they may trust more than they trust, a politician, right? Even if I am born and raised here. So it was about engaging the other community leaders and asking them, like, I need your help, and I still do that. I cannot do it by myself. Like, when it comes to engaging my district, it cannot be me, like, just being at the top and like just trying to, to kind of tell everybody what to do. Like, it never works that way. Like, nobody receives it that way. I wouldn't. And so like, I've reached out to my faith base, which is very large in my district, different pastors and, different denominations. Like, like, I have a lot of evangelicals, Catholics, Mormons in my district, and I reach out to everybody. And I think the beauty that has come out of, or like the blessing that has come out of COVID, is that I've seen more of us engage. Like, my food banks, like, if we have it at a church, it's not just the evangelical, portion that's taking care of it. It's the evangelicals. I have members of, the Mormon church, some Catholic. We're all like working together in our community, diverse religious faith, and even in, just ethnic background, because we are one community. But I think going forward with how things are, like, for myself and my district, I'm gonna have to continue to do that. I'm gonna have to reach out to my community members while we're doing what we have to do at the legislature. I'm gonna have to ask them to please help me. I'm blessed because my district, we fight hard, but we love hard too. And so I have a lot of community leaders that are willing to take it on. So yeah.
Yeah, what I really love about what you just said, 3 things kind of struck me, is your recognition that it's not always, the authority isn't always going to be heard by you, right? That there are anointed other unofficial community leaders that actually you can keep in touch with, who can actually help spread the message that you want to share or receive messages from constituents. So I appreciate that you're looking at informal leaders of your community too.
I mean, especially in a Hawaiian community, there's certain aunties that I can call and I know their whole family going to find out what's going on.
Right. The coconut wireless.
Right. Like, and like I know we joke about it a lot, but like the coconut wireless is so important, because when people get tired of going on to social media because it's so negative and you're bombarded with all kinds of chaos, like you're not gonna want to go there.
Right.
And like everyone's scared because nobody wants to catch COVID, you know what I mean? I mean, it affects not just your health, but like my community, like I have a lot, at least 50% of my community lives like on or below the poverty line.
Right.
If they cannot go to work, that affects a lot of things. You know what I mean? So I mean, that's an added on stress and pressure. It's not just about getting COVID. It's about how is it going to affect my family?
Absolutely.
The food that we have on our table, the roof that we have over our head,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just stuff like that. But I'm sorry, I'm Hawaiian, but I'm
No,
also
no,
so I'm gonna
no,
mute.
no, and you know, it's kind of what Councilmember Evslin said, is it's all interrelated, right? It's the environment, school, food, health, everything is interrelated. If one is lacking or, you know, vulnerable, it's going to affect everything else. So I think I hear that's what you're saying as well.
Right.
The other thing that struck me is faith-based entities can also be substitutes for community engagement. So, you know, those are automatic coalescing areas for people in communities. So,
you know, to be, you know, fair and blunt about it, you know, it's been my faith base that when my community feels government is failing and not there to provide the assistance that it needs, that is where they go.
mm-hmm.
They go to see their pastor, their bishop, their priest, you know, and these are trusted members of not just the community, but their family. So, you know, it's important, like, I think, not just as advocates, but even as legislators or, you know, like council people, like we need to know these people in our community. It's vital for us to thrive, to have these relationships, you know, and it doesn't mean that we always like agree on every single thing, right? But we have a common core value set, like we love our communities, you know, and we want to see everyone be safe, be healthy, and do well. So
sure.
Anyway, so
yeah, no, I appreciate that point. And then the third point I took away is that of the engagement that is happening in your community, it's deeper out of COVID. So these are some of the silver linings that are coming out, and hopefully post-COVID, post-pandemic, we can hold on to these deeper relationships or deeper ways of communicating and engaging. So mahalo for that. I appreciate those points. Councilmember Evslin, did you want to share anything about kind of how you're alternatively engaging your constituency and vice versa?
Yeah, I've been in office now for 3.5 years, so two-thirds of that has been in COVID. So it's not even alternative. This is kind of my entire
it's your normal.
and I, you know, for my first 14 months or so pre-COVID, I was trying to do like a quarterly town halls, and they were kind of going around the island, and there'd be maybe 10 people or sometimes 4 people showing up, but they were so great. You know, you just like, especially with 4 people, you just have really great conversations, and it would kind of be an update on what we've done on council and then getting feedback from them. When COVID hit, I tried to try and do the same thing, you know, via Zoom, and it's so not the same, right? You don't get the same type of collaborative conversation. It's really like on Zoom, it's me talking to them, and I haven't figured out a way to just get better on Zoom. So I was doing a weekly Zoom thing and trying to keep it real informal, and it just kind of petered out because I'd, you know, get one person show up or something. So a lot of my engagements on Facebook, I'll try and do a weekly update after every council meeting, saying here's all the things we're working on, and a lot of the engagements through the comments there, I'll encourage people to ask questions or contribute. But it is hard because social media can be so toxic and draining in some sense. So I just put myself on a 3-week social media break here to try and just spend time with my kids over the holidays and yes, exactly. So I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out how to really use social media. You know, I'm sometimes a child of social media. I've been on Facebook since like the first year it was around, and I still just struggle with managing it. But it can be great. Also, sometimes I'll go out there and I'll say, hey, you know, open slate, send me ideas for, you know, regardless of legality or if it's possible, just what do you want to see happen? And sometimes you can get some really great stuff through that. But I'll just sort of finish it by saying 2 quick things. One, as a council member, at least on Kauaʻi, right, I got a kind of a relatively small constituency here, and so I don't get 200 emails every morning. I get shockingly few emails. I'll get maybe, you know, weekly 7 emails from constituents asking questions or something, and I love them, right? I love engaging with people in that way. I mean, if anybody reaches out to me saying, hey, I would love to meet you and have coffee or something, right, I'll meet up with anybody for any reason, basically. And so just encouragement, especially for people maybe in smaller communities, or if you've got, you know, a council member representing your district, right, reach out to them directly, and I'm sure they'd love to meet up with you. And sorry, my last final thing on that is I really try and do as much as I can sort of outside of my role as a council member. I'm a canoe paddler and I love canoe paddling. And I feel like a lot of my sort of most effective engagement in some sense is in that, just going to a canoe race where it's not like me, you know, being council member talking to people. In some sense, I'm just another paddler, and you know, you're hearing from the community in that way. So for me, I really try and do as much community stuff like that outside of my official role.
Yeah, and that's where you probably get your greatest intelligence, right? Is just being average Joe alongside your canoe paddlers. Yeah, and I do feel your pain around kind of the love-hate relationship with social media. You know, from any given day, sometimes I love it and sometimes I just can't stand it. So I understand you're fast. And then just before we move on to the next question, I do see Desi McKenzie, who, by the way, was my daughter's chorus teacher at Nu'uanu Elementary. So good to see you again here, Desi. But she recommends drive-in style meetings. And I don't know what the logistics of that looks like, but I love that people are kind of thinking out of the box in the chat box here for different ways that we might be able to engage. So, okay, and I know we're kind of running out of time, so maybe we'll make this the final question, but then also, please, I encourage all of you in the chat, if you have questions, we'd much rather you ask these questions. We put together some questions to kind of get the juices flowing, right? Get the talk story going, but anybody else, feel free. We have, for the rest of the time, we'd love it to be your questions. So, but in the meantime, what general advice do you each have for new advocates?
I'll go first here, since I've been going last every time. I think just don't be afraid to reach out. And I tell, or talking to like high school kids who want to get engaged more, and they're stressed that they might not know the details of if they're talking about the need for affordable housing, right? They don't often have like the exact answers, or they're not proposing the solution. But a lot of times it's just, I think, expressing your own concerns about an issue. I kind of look at, stakeholder feedback in two buckets. One is, the expert testimony with somebody who really knows the nuances of it, who's looking at to help craft the legislation, and just the other people who are helping communicate their concerns. So I think don't be afraid of not knowing every angle of whatever it is you're talking about. And then certainly the other part is just, being willing to form a relationship. If you're on Kauaʻi and you email me, I would love to meet up with you. And I think every rep or council member is the same, right? That's the benefit of state and local politics, is that we have relatively small communities. So form a relationship with your local elected officials.
Thank you, mahalo.
I would say the most important thing for me is that initial approach. So to approach it as a joint problem solving kind of situation. And also to remember that we individually have limited power. So to have reasonable expectations. So in the House, we have 51 members. When my community members or advocates come to me and ask me to solve a problem, there are some problems that I can, as a singular legislator, address, but the broad systemic issues, I will need to work with my colleagues, and it is, I will want to know how we can do the work together. So I think it's that collaborative approach that I would strongly suggest.
Yeah, mahalo for saying that. I think a lot of new advocates have fear around sort of the power and the privilege of the dynamic of working with legislators. And so I appreciate that you are reminding us that we're partners in this community work. And I think all advocates should approach it that way. I think Councilmember Evslin said the same thing, like, don't be afraid to approach, just let's just talk story. So thank you to you both for reminding us of that.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add that, in the work that you folks are doing, you are already courageous because you're doing this work. But I think, just stay strong and really I always recommend to people, I'm only like, I'm only in my second term, mostly been dealing with COVID. You know what I mean? Like I'm 3 years strong, going in as a legislator, but you know, really like, yeah, like engage, you know, don't be afraid, and really think of the long-term game. You know, like I think a lot of people when they get involved in policy and politics, like they're looking for instant gratification, like we're gonna bam, you know, get them done like today. And you know, like in a perfect world, like that would be wonderful. But I have learned that everything is a process and it takes time. Because right when you think like, why wouldn't they like my idea, or why wouldn't they like what we're pushing? Like this is like the best thing ever. And then, you know, sometimes what you may not realize is they may have another group within their district, you know, that don't like your idea at all, and yelling at them on the other side, or yelling at us on the other side. And, you know, like as much as possible, I think to be fair to all of my colleagues, I think for the most part, we try to balance, you know, while, you know, like the needs and wants of our communities, of our districts, and also maintaining doing the right thing. And in trying to get to that, like it can take time. So I would say do not be discouraged if you come and you're advocating for a bill and it doesn't get passed, or you make it right to conference and then it dies and you're like, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? Like I've seen friends and, you know, even family members who are engaged in policy and whatnot, like just gets totally like just you know, like bombed out. Like I can't believe, like I don't want to do this anymore. Like, no, like we need you to stay, because that's what it is. You know, like you need to stay engaged, you know, stay. And I will say, like, it's intimidating. Before I got elected, like, you know, like going into the state capitol to speak to a representative or to a senator or to a council person, even though like we know we're just regular people, you know what I mean? Like we cry and we, you know, sweat, and you know what I mean? Like, we have like, you know, like we like, you know what I mean? Like I fall down walking in heels, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like we all have those moments. So like we're normal human beings, but I get it. Like it can be intimidating, but just remind yourself that, you know, like we're just people and you're just sharing. And so, like I said, like, you know, like call us, email us, you know what I mean? I too have like a love-hate relationship with social media. I like all the fun stuff. I hate getting beat up on it, you know what I mean? But I think at the end of the day, just do that, you know. So
Right. So Colette says many citizens lose sight that we are all a part of the solution, not just politicians. So it's a tough and unappreciated job. So I appreciate that Colette shared that. And you
I just want to add too, like if I can, you know, when you approach us, you know, like it's always great to have a solution. You know, like everybody has a, you know, everybody got problems with, you know, what's going on, and like they think we're like, you know what I mean? Like I don't have a magic wand, you know what I mean? But if you come with a solution and an idea of where, you know, where you would like it to be, and you're willing to work with us, you know, I think that's the most powerful thing ever. Because, you know, like we don't, like, even with my community members, like we don't always have to agree on everything, but if I know that we have a common goal, like, you know, this is what we want to get done, like I think that we get to the problem solving part way
faster. Yeah, kind of always remembering everyone's an intention, right? True intentions at the end of the day, even though we have different ideas of the pathway, right? I appreciate that Councilmember Evslin also says that, you know, he's happy to meet outdoors at a park or whatever, right? Or Zoom. And that kind of answers the question that Kat had about, okay, with just how do you get a meeting, right? Can people just call you? So call your office, ask for a Zoom meeting, like what's the protocol? And
I would like, I think for my office, I mean, I think either call or email would be fine, but I think send an email, you know, like with information, and I would say like send an email first, and I mean, my office, we get back to you, but I can't speak for everyone, but I would just, you know, like give it a few days. If you don't hear anything back, then just, you know, do a follow-up call. and just like, you know, just say, hey, you know, like we sent an email, would love to meet you. Because I mean, not that I'm Niele or anything like that, but if you invite me, I'm coming. You know, like if you want to invite me to a cleanup or a planting, like I mean, just for me personally, like I love that kind of stuff only because I like that I only have to spend time in the capital during session. The rest of my time I love spending in my district, and I feel like maybe some of my colleagues, like they feel that way too. So I think like even with the building, at least for the state capitol being closed, it's okay, you know, to invite us to a Zoom, or, you know, like if, you know, like Luke said, like if you want to, you know, meet with us outside, you know, I think just reassuring that, you know, like everyone's going to be safe, like, you know, like we're going to wear a mask, you know what I mean? Like we're going to distance, I think, you know, because like some of my colleagues, like they have infants, you know, or they're taking care of their parents who are vulnerable, right? So that might be another layer why they may not want to meet in person. So don't take it personal if they tell you they prefer to do a Zoom or a phone call. But yeah.
Appreciate that. Okay, so we have about 3 minutes left, and you know, I appreciate that. I think all of you put your contact information in the chat for everyone. So mahalo for doing that. Encouraging all of the attendees to please take them up on that, and reach out, as well as any other you know, public officials, council members, county council and legislators, even our congressional delegation, right, is don't hold back on communicating and reaching out in these times. Do the three of you have any like final thoughts or observations that you would like to share? Just some mana'o as we close out.
Sorry, I'll go real quick. As Rep Eli was saying it, I was sort of thinking it through. For me, when somebody's reaching out to me, I actually think it's okay just to reach out with just the problem. As she said, certainly if you've got a solution in mind and you're willing to like do the grind of policy work, that's amazing. But I don't normally expect that of most people unless they're really active in you know, policy development. For me, so much of the work we do is really trying to like identify what the problems are, right? And it's easy to say like, I don't know, home prices are too high, but you know, trying to dive into that, like what are the impacts of home prices being too high, and is it, you know, when you're going to get your permit, are you finding a barrier, you know, at this level, and really trying to get to these sort of more granular problems. And then once you can identify that problem, like, you know, planning took 3 months to approve my permit or something, then we can sort of try and untangle that through a policy lever. So I guess I just would encourage people not to be too afraid to reach out to their reps with a real specific problem in mind. And I'm sure we'll all be honest with you if that's something that the county can handle, or if the state can handle, or if we can't handle it. But I'm always like those types of engagement and trying to do the hard work of untangling the problem.
Nice. Any other final thoughts?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would just say, you know, as legislators and as representatives or policy folks, we spend a lot of time cautioning community to be pragmatic and reasonable, and I think too, it's really important to be aspirational and to tell us about your dreams and about the vision, because I feel like we're so often saying no, and we need to find really beautiful places and things to talk about that are about the yes. So that's what I'm thinking about as we head into 2022.
Sorry, I know I already spoke. I just want to chime in that I agree so completely with that, right? I so much of our thinking and our policy is always no, right? It's we really have to get to yes. What can we do, and what can we untangle, and what are these, you know, how can we solve these problems? So I do think reframing things into yes is important, as Rep. Perruso said eloquently.
Yeah, great.
I think I would just say to stay encouraged. You know, this is the work that you folks are doing is so important, and you know, it's not easy. If everybody could do it, everyone would, and you know, not everyone does. But also like just, you know, take time just for like the self-care part, you know, like you're going to be grinding like all the time year round, you know, trying to figure out who you have to meet with, you know, and you know, making sure that you're just make sure that you're taking care of yourselves too. You know, I think through COVID and just the loss of so many of my community members and family members, not just of COVID, but just overall, like I think I have just a personal thing, like make sure you take time for yourself, make sure you take time for your family. That's gonna ground you. I'm like, it's gonna ground you and it's gonna help empower you too. You know, the like for us, like you know what I mean, like the work can be wonky and it can also be like just you know like just a lot, you know, because you know like we fight, you know, we constantly catching cracks all over the place, and you know, you fighting with others who don't agree with you, right? But at the end of the day, like you know what I mean, you just need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family. Don't get lost in your work, is what I'm trying to say. You know, because you're gonna wake up one day and you're gonna be like, holy smokes, like the babies are big, you know what I mean? And I didn't get to play with them as much as I wanted to, or I wish I took time to spend with my kupuna and, you know, like really pull the ike that they have to pass on to you. And you didn't do that because you were so caught up in the work. While it's good work and it's needed, you need to make sure that you do that. So that's my last thing. I guess
that's a nice way to close out, is a reminder to everyone to keep everything in perspective, right? These are unusual times. It's kind of interesting that for several of you, all you've known is COVID in your public service, in public office. So interesting. But want to thank all three of you, our panelists, for taking time today to spend with us. I want to thank all the advocates who have joined us on a Saturday. I think this was a wonderful chance to connect and get to know all of you, the panelists. I love that in the chat, people are sharing their mana'o and finding affinity with each other, sharing their contact information. And, you know, the silver lining is that when you're physically in a room, you're not likely to be sharing your phone number across the table while you're listening to a panel present. And so the fact that this can kind of happen simultaneously is also beautiful. So these are some silver linings that we will continue to unearth in this crazy pandemic. But for now, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank all of the partnering organizations for helping to put this on, for Ryan for his wonderful presentation earlier, to our panelists, our esteemed panelists. It was so good to get to know you in this way. And to all of our advocates, imua, and good luck this year in all of the important community work that you're each doing, because you're all doing awesome work. And just aloha, have a wonderful, safe weekend. Be well, everybody. Take care.